Hello, today we're going to talk about the calculations required in order to build an external set of stairs. Now let's start with a little bit of terminology. You can see I've coloured everything a different colour in here, and you'll see why in a moment. These two horizontal lines are our finished floor levels. Every time a stair goes up vertically, that's called a rise, and every time it goes across horizontally, that's called a going. So you'll notice in here, in this set of stairs, we've got 3 rises, but we've only got 2 goings, and that's common to all flights of steps. You always have 1 less going than you do rises in a single flight. So if we measure from finished floor level to finished floor level, that gives us a total rise. Now, for the sake of clarity, you'll hear me refer to these as individual rises. Now that's not a trade name, that's just simply a word that I'm going to use today for the sake of this video, so that when I say rise, you know whether I'm talking about an individual rise like this or if I'm talking about the total rise. So I'll be using the phrase individual rise just for the sake of clarity. So you can see that our total rise is simply made up of all of our individual rises added together, from finished floor level to finished floor level. So of course that means if we measure horizontally from in line with our first rise to in line with our last rise, that gives us our total going. And again, all of our individual goings added up will equal our total going, always measured from first rise to last rise, total rise measured from finished floor level to finished floor level. Right, this is the only other phrase that you probably need to know, is our margin line. The margin line will always touch the front edge of all of our treads, and it will also touch the front edge of the decking up the top here. So here's an example of a location where we need to build a set of stairs. We've got what could be the front edge of a landing or the front edge of a house or a veranda. This is where our stairs need to start. You'll notice the ground line is not level, and that's quite common. If you're building the set of stairs on the outside of the house, your ground may not be dead flat, and that's important to remember as we go on with these calculations. So there's a basic 5-step process to calculating all the measurements we need in a set of stairs. The first is working out the total rise, and that's fairly easy. You can either get it off the plans. If your plans have finished floor levels marked on them, you can just get them off that. Or if you've got an existing building that you're going to build to, you can just simply measure it with a measuring tape straight off the side. The next step is to calculate the individual rises, which just requires a calculator. The next stage is where we think about landings. Now in this video we're not going to deal with landings. I'm going to save that for the next video, but this is where you would worry about them, because every time you put a landing in, it splits your stair up into some different sections. The 4th step is to work out the individual goings, which again is just going to require the calculator, and then we finish off with the total going. So you can see the steps make a bit of sense. Total rise, individual rise, landings, individual going, total going. And that's the 5 steps to calculating them out. The only things left to do once we do all of that is just to do all the checks, confirm all of our measurements, and that's a very important process. We do need to run through with all the checks, and we can just finish off by calculating the stringer lengths, which we'll deal with at the end of this video. But those are the basic 5 steps: rises, landings, goings, and that's the process. So let's start with an example here. Here's our veranda, let's call it up the top here. There's our ground which slopes away from the building. So the first step is the total rise, and in order to do that, we need to get a horizontal line coming out here off the finished floor level. You can see, because of this sloping ground, if we simply grab a measuring tape and we measure at this location next to the veranda, we're going to get a measurement that's not correct, because by the time we build our stairs out, they're going to be hanging way up in the air up here at this point. So we can't just simply measure it here, not if our ground line is not level. So we need to get a horizontal line heading out in line with our finished floor level. So we can either do this With a laser level, I often use my little box laser, which I just sit on the deck and shoot out horizontally. You can even just use a straight edge with a spirit level on it if your stairs aren't too big. So I'm going to grab my measuring tape, and I have to estimate where I think my stairs will finish up. So if we sort of follow on about that angle, most stairs come down to around about the 35 to 37 degrees, which is just a bit longer than 45. I think they're going to end somewhere around here. So I'm going to grab my measuring tape and just shoot my measuring tape from there up to my straight edge or my laser level. And for the sake of this example, we're going to say that I've measured 1530 at a height from where I think the stairs will finish up to level with my finished floor level at the top. So I'm just going to grab a piece of paper or a bit of plywood or something and just write down my list of steps in there, total rise 1530. So now we need to do some calculations. We need to divide that up. So the first step I want to do is come up with an average rise that I think will be close to what I want to end up with. And usually anywhere around 170 to 175 is an appropriate, what we call trial rise, which is basically a first attempt. So I'm going to grab the calculator, I'm going to go 1530 divided by 175, and that's going to give me a number of rises. You'll see I've got a decimal point. Now we can't have 0.7 of a rise. We need an even number, so I've either got to round it down to 8 or I round it up to 9. So I'm going to pick one. I'm going to pick 8. I'm going to go 1530 divided by 8. That gives me a rise of 191. Now 191 I can't use. It's not legal. It's too big. So I'm going to have another go. Instead of rounding down, I'm going to round up. So 1530 divided by 9, that gives me 170. That's a good rise. I'm happy with that one. Now if I want to, I can even do another couple of test runs just to see what I get. If I divide it by 10, that gives me a rise of 153, which is legal, but a little bit small. Maybe if I were building a set of stairs for a childcare or maybe an aged care home, I might go to a lower rise so it's easier to step up. But that's not the case with this set of stairs. So I'm happy with 9 rises at 170. So I'm just going to write that down next to my list. Third step, we think of landings, but in this particular stair there is no landings. There's just going to be a single flight of steps, so let's not worry about that. We'll save that for the next video. Third step, individual goings. And this is quite easy. If you remember from earlier, we always have one less going than rises. So if I've got 9 rises, I'm going to have one less, which gives me 8 goings, and that's always the case. As far as the size of the going, I'm just going to use the width of the timber that I'm going to use as the tread. So that's going to be a 250mm piece of hardwood. So that gives me my goings, or my individual goings will be 8 at 250. Last step is very easy, our total going. All we have to do is 8 times 250, that gives us our total going. Just like up here in our rises, 9 at 170 gives me my total rise. And that's the basic set of calculations. So now that we've worked that out, we need to do some checks. There's a couple of checks we're going to make. The first one is that we're going to confirm that when we made this estimate and we estimated where the stairs will finish, we're going to check that that is in fact in the right spot. So now that we've done these calculations, we have a total going, an exact distance out now. So this is where I originally shot a line across, and this is the spot that I originally measured my height at. If I grab a tape and I come out exactly my total going, you'll notice I've overshot the mark just a little bit. So I need to move my tape into the exact correct spot and just re-measure that total rise. Now what this does is it may change the rise just a little bit. If your estimate is fairly close, it won't change it too much. So my new measurement here is 1510, so I'm a little bit shorter than my original 1530 measurement. So I'm going to divide it by the number of rises that I already worked out. I originally had 9 at 170. If I divide that, I now have 9 at 167.7. And for the sake of 0.3 of a mil, I can round that up just to 168 because it's so close. So this was what I originally wrote down on my piece of plywood. So instead of 1530, I actually now have 1510, and instead of 9 at 170, I'll go 1510 divided by 9, and that gave me my 168. So you'll notice it only changed my rise by 2 mil. Because my estimate was fairly close, it didn't change my rise so much that I have to worry about changing the going. Everything's fine. I just had to adjust that a little bit. So the last check we need to make is that all of our measurements give us a legal set of stairs. So let's have a look at what we need for a stair to be legal. First of all, the rise has to be between 115 and 190, and it is. So that's fine. The going must be between 240 and 355, and it is 250. That's fine. And the last check is that the ratio between the going and the rise is correct. So if we use this formula, twice the rise plus the going, that's got to end up in between 550 and 700. So I'm going to take 168 times 2, and then I'll add 250 to that answer. So 2 times 168 plus 250, that gives me 586. And that is in between there. So my stairs are going to be legal, and that's good. So that's all my checking of measurements and confirming of measurements complete. So that leaves the last thing that we want to do. We just work out how long we need the stringers to be in order to make up our flight of stairs. So here's what we have just measured up. You can see here in the yellow numbers we've got 9 rises and we've got 8 going. So this is the set of steps that we're going to end up with eventually. And that is basically where the stringer will be positioned. The cuts at the top and the cuts at the bottom may vary depending on the situation, but most sets of steps usually contains a stringer that looks something like this. Bottom of the stringer sits on the bottom tread, and a checkout in the top to be mortised into the post. So there's all the measurements that I originally had, and we're going to use some measurements that are in here. And the easiest way of working out how long a piece of timber I need to cut that stringer is simply number of rises times 300. Now there's a couple of reasons we use 300 mil for our stringer lengths, and I'm going to show you in here. Every time we go up a rise, so there's our first rise, it adds approximately 300 mil of length onto the stringer. Up another rise, up another 300, up another rise, up another 300. So that means number of rises times 300, and in this example here I've got 3 rises. 3 times 300 equals a 900 long piece of timber to cut that stringer. The second reason we use 300 mil as our measurement that we use is because that is an orderable length of timber. I can order timber at 0.9, or in the case of this stringer, if I go 9 rises times 300, I can order a piece of 2.7. 0.3 or 300 millimeters, they are orderable lengths of timber. Now I want to go back for a moment and just show you something here. It's important we use the number of rises, not number of goings. You'll notice if I go number of goings on this stairs, I'm only going to have 2 goings because I've got 1 less going. If you go number of goings times 300, you're going to be 300 short, and you have to add that onto the end. So that's why I always go number of rises, not number of goings. So rises times 300. And that will give us the length of timber we need to cut that stringer up. Alright, so that's our basic 5 steps. We've worked out our rises first, we've worked out our goings, we've checked them all, and we've measured our stringers. And that is basically how a single flight of steps will look. Thank you very much. Please have a look at the second video, which will deal with stairs that contain landings.